Now, someone might say, how does this apply to my children? Because what you're saying sounds very complicated, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. Same thing with your kids. What do we do with our kids? What's the standard thing? Just get them to memorize Quran. That's it. But if we start to apply this, so they're memorizing some Quran, they're memorizing some hadith, they're doing the tafsir, starting with maybe a basic tafsir of Juz Amma, for example, and then progressing onwards to a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complicated. And in terms of belief, they started studying that maybe they begin with just the pillars of Iman in a basic way, and then they move on to something a bit more complicated and a bit more complicated. And if we do that, our kids get a rounded education of what Islam is. So these principles, you can make them as complicated or as easy as you want. They don't have to be super complicated. You can, if you don't want to go to that crazy level, that really difficult level, you can go to a simple level. But you still have to see Islam as being different topics. You still have to start with the basics and move upwards. And you still have to keep a record of what you're studying and what you're planning to study. Otherwise, you're just collecting YouTube videos. That's all you're doing. And it's not you're not gaining any more knowledge. You're not becoming a person of knowledge. You're just getting information from here and from there, and you're just getting by. I'm managing, okay. You know, I'm learning how to pray in a basic way. I'm sort of learning the basics of what I need to do as a Muslim, but I'm not learning in the way that those ahadith talk about, you know, the way that makes Jannah easy for you, and the way that, you know, you benefit other people and yourself, you remove ignorance from yourself and others and so on. You're not getting that unless you study in some detail and with some structure. And what's interesting is that if you think about what I've said today, it's not that different from how you study anything, really. It's like what I've said today is not that unfamiliar to you, whatever you've studied. If you studied engineering, it's probably pretty much the same kind of principles, whether you recognize it or whether you don't, that you started by dividing the topic up into, you know, subtopics. So if you studied maths, for example, you know, you had calculus and you had, you know, whatever, you had, you know, algebra, and you had trigonometry, and you had all these different like divisions. You broke it up into subjects, and you started off with the easy stuff, and then you went up to the more difficult stuff. And, you know, the different methods of learning, you know, you kept a record. If you didn't keep a record, then your school kept a record of what you had studied, and or your university kept a record of what you had studied and what you hadn't studied, and so on. So these principles are fundamental principles of learning. Like, they apply to everything, but we have to be careful when it comes to Islam, because if we don't get that or we don't follow that way, then what happens is you waste a lot of time. You waste a lot of time. And you've watched hours and hours and hours and hours of videos and attended lecture after lecture after lecture, but it's not moving you anywhere. Bearing in mind what I said about the importance of acting upon the knowledge that you have. It's not just about gaining knowledge, but about putting it into practice as well.